Hi, my name is Scott the Miniature Maniac, and today we're painting the White Wolf, the bastard of Winterfell, the King of the North, and the knower of nothing, Jon Snow. What up, mini family? Season 8 of Game of Thrones is premiering soon, and I thought it'd be a good idea to paint up the poster child of this series, Jon Snow. But before we start laying thick coats, like fur coats, let's head to the board for a plan. Welcome to Operation Everything is Black. I figured I'd spare you my drawing skills in favor of using literally all of my printer ink. Now, Jon Snow's character is a man of the Night's Watch, which essentially is the medieval equivalent of a goth. He gets to dress in all black, and this poses a bit of a challenge for us miniature painters. How are we supposed to paint all these individual parts of his costume and be able to discern the difference between them if they're all black? Well, let's take a closer look at his armor. If we look at his leather chest armor right here, the first thing you start to notice that it isn't actually black, but it's rather a very, very dark brown. And then in this picture, you can see that his cloth undergarment is possibly a little bit blue. So the first answer here is that it's not all pure black. It's black that's tinted various shades of color. Next, Johnny Boy here is wearing all kinds of different materials. He's got leather, he's got cloth, he's got fur, and all of these different parts reflect light in different ways. And the way we paint it, i.e. where we put our highlights and shadows, is going to help the viewer discern, hey, that's a different material. Now, the last thing we could consider doing is using different paint brands that have different finishes. Citadel, for instance, has a very glossy finish, whereas Scale 75 has a very matte finish. Say, for instance, we use Scale 75 to paint his cloth, and we use Citadel to paint his leather, which is oftentimes more shiny. The difference in finish is going to help the viewer discern the different parts of the armor of Jon Snow. Alright, with a plan in tow and my AIRBRUSH 5000 installed securely, let's touch Jon Snow with some paintbrushes, tenderly. Before we break out the brushes, what we're going to do is clean the miniature. Like with all miniatures, this one comes with mold lines. Traditionally, with plastic board game miniatures, it's kind of hard to scrape off the mold lines. The miniature seems to be made of something that's kind of more rubbery than it is easily sandable. I shaved off some of the larger chunks with an X-Acto knife and dealt with the rest of the mold lines with a sanding twig. Oftentimes when I'm painting board game miniatures like this, I don't even get rid of the mold lines because it doesn't really matter, but I know I'll suffer the wrath of the internet, so I decided to do it. Next, I decided to test my theory about painting the different parts of Jon Snow slightly different colors. First, I painted the cloth garments a mixture of navy blue and black, and I'm using Scale 75 paints in this case. I put down a few layers of this dark blue mixture to not only get the right opacity, but also get the correct finish. It will get progressively more and more matte the more paint I add to a certain point. Fortunately, I had Audible to help me pass the time by listening to A Game of Thrones, the first book in the series, A Song of Ice and Fire. Dude likes to start his titles with the word A. Audible is offering the mini family a free 30-day trial and a free book when signing up at audibletrial.com/Miniac. And as I said, I was listening to the first book in the series called A Game of Thrones, and I've watched the whole first season as well, so I could do an interesting comparison to the movie series. And they've gotten a few things wrong. One is really confusing conveying how young all the children are. Like Robb and Jon Snow are like 14, Sansa's like 12, Dany Targaryen is also like 12 or something like that, and they're being forced into this climate where they have to kind of grow up at an incredibly accelerated rate. Another thing you kind of miss out on when watching the TV show is the deep dives the book goes into to develop each character's feelings and emotions. For instance, I didn't really understand how much Eddard Stark's wife really disliked Jon Snow because he was a bastard child. Of course, that makes sense, but they didn't really convey it very well in the TV show. The first book opens up with Men of the Night's Watch, and over the first couple of chapters, you really get an idea for how self-sacrificing these men are to join this brotherhood of defenders and kind of leave everything else behind. It's really inspiring to listen to while painting the actual figures. So if you guys want to listen to the series A Song of Ice and Fire, the book of Game of Thrones is the first one. You can do so on Audible by signing up for a free trial at audibletrial.com/Miniac. All right, back to painting good old Johnny boy. Next, I painted the brown leather armor with Citadel paints with a mixture of dark brown and black. Then I painted the black leather elements with Citadel's Abaddon black. This is the boots, the gloves, and also the belts on his chest. Then I painted the scarf, mixture of dark purple and black from scale 75. Now I know Jon Snow doesn't actually have a purple scarf, but I figured this would be an interesting test to see if we could differentiate all of these black elements in this way. And then finally I painted his cloak, flat black from scale 75. Okay, so we've base coated everything in a pretty dark color, and at this point I want to see if it kind of reads as black just with an initial base coat. And looking at it, it kind of doesn't. And I'm not going to worry about it just yet. I'm going to move on to the shading and highlighting step to see if this adjusts it further, but this is kind of in the back of my mind. I first started by painting the brown leather armor. Since the paint is glossy, I was looking at it under the light of my hobby light to determine where to start placing the highlights. Truthfully, after I started to do the next steps, this first initial highlight didn't really matter a whole lot. I began to mix in a very light brown color from scale 75, which again is a more matte color range. I used this color to start edge highlighting each of the straps and adding little tiny nicks and scratches. I wanted to use a flatter color because when leather kind of tarnishes, the material beneath that top glossy coat is more of a matter finish. After I got the leather to an area that I liked, I made sure to run a black color in between all of the lines of the leather to separate each strand nicely. Now the chest armor kind of looks like it should be metal, but in the first season of the show, Jon Snow is only ever wearing leather armor on his chest, at least on the top. So I actually drew in some grooves similar to the leather on his waist and also his arms to make it match, and painted the same color and followed the same procedure. Next, I worked on the scarf, and with this I very sparingly highlighted it purple and also highlighted it a purple mixed with a very light blue with a dotted texture to kind of give it more of a rough look. I was pretty sparing with this highlight because I didn't want to have the scarf read more as purple than as black. Finally, I also recess shaded the scarf with a black color to bring back some of that darkness. Next, I worked on the cloth elements. I took our original base tone, which was navy blue and black mixed together from scale 75, and started to add progressively more and more light blue to get a highlight. And after the dark brown, purple, and blue elements, I moved on to painting the true black elements, which were the gloves and the boots and the scabbard. And I started with Abaddon black from Citadel again because I wanted a glossier black color. I began highlighting with a mixture of gray and black, both paints also from Citadel, to maintain that glossy look. I then finished with a pretty bright gray highlight. Namely, as I paint the glove here, I'm not applying the highlight on the very top of the glove, but more on the rounded surface as it transitions from a horizontal surface to a vertical surface. Now it's worth mentioning that I'm highlighting these objects as if they are glossy surfaces. And if you need help figuring out how to do that and where to place the highlights, make sure to watch my non-metallic metal video. I know we're not doing non-metallic metal right now, but the discussions in the first half of that video will empower you to be able to highlight things like leather and also silk according to the material. After that, I moved on to the cloak, which is more of a rough fabric and less of a glossy leather, so I used scale 75 this time and applied some pretty rough highlights in 2 stages with a pretty dark gray and then a brighter gray. I then did some pretty rough blending with some wet blending to get an initial transition, but it isn't terribly important that we get a totally smooth blend because the next part we're going to be roughening it up a little bit. I took those same highlight colors and even a brighter highlight color and diluted them quite a bit and tried to recreate a fabric texture by making very small little lines that are running perpendicular to the highlight. This gives the fabric a nice texture and differentiates it from the rest of the character's outfit. After the first couple of layers of highlighting, everything still doesn't necessarily look black, so you may need to take some drastic measures later on. Once the cloak was done, I started to work on the furs of Jon Snow, and in some photos he has black fur, in other ones he has white fur, and so I decided to give myself a little bit of a break here with the black and do the white fur. For the fur on his back, I did a 4-color... Bullet, come here! This is not for you. Drop it. My direwolf's being a bad direwolf. For the fur on his back, I started to do a 4-color wet blend from a pretty bright cream color all the way to black with 2 brown tones in between. And it's probably worth mentioning that I'm not getting this wet blend on the first shot. I need to do it 2 or 3 times to get the correct opacity and also the right blend. Once that was done, I hit it with a wash, a brown wash, and then started to pick out the individual furs with the exact same colors that I used to apply the original base coat. I'm making sure to let the brown wash reside in the recesses so I get that nice definition. I also added some pure white highlight very close to his shoulders and his face to kind of draw the attention up to Jon Snow's face because he is the prettiest boy. For the fur on the boots and also its brown leather elements, I didn't do a 4-color wet blend. I just started with a normal tan color, washed it, and then applied a single highlight to it. Speaking of Jon Snow's pretty face, we start by base coating in Kislev flesh, and I wanted to use Kislev here because Citadel paints, as aforementioned, have a glossier finish, and the next step, which is washing it in Reikland flesh shade, tends to do better on a glossier surface. After the wash was dried, I applied another layer of Kislev flesh to clean it up, and then I added progressively more and more white to the Kislev flesh to develop a highlight. And where I'm placing the highlights is the top of the forehead, the tops of the cheekbones, the end of the nose, his top lip, bottom lip, and also his chin, kind of enunciating all those details that would receive light. After the skin tone was established, I needed to work on the eyes, and I could tell the eyes were not very easy to paint, and they weren't very apparent with the sculpt. So I started by applying an off-white tone, and this is when I really realized that I wasn't gonna get much help from the sculpt here. So I came back in with a dark brown color and lined the outline of the eyeball to give it more definition, and then used that same color to give him a little dot for a pupil and iris. Maybe an easier way to approach this would be to first apply a base coat of that dark brown color and then fill it in with the off-white color, making sure to keep the outline around that white part. Next, I wanted Jon Snow to look like he was in a cold environment because the wall is a pretty frigid place. So I took some red ink and thinned it down a lot and glazed it over his cheeks and also the end of his nose to kind of give him that wintry flushed look. Finally, this miniature is very clearly a young Jon Snow and not the season 8 Jon Snow that we know, and he doesn't have much of a beard. He's got a beautiful baby face though, just like yours truly. So I took some blue ink and glazed down around his jawline to give him a 5 o'clock shadow to kind of split the difference here between having no beard and having a beard in the current season. It's very hard to do a 2-scale beard by like kind of dotting little spots along his chin. And so to get a nice 2-scale beard, we do this because the blue ink counteracts with the red in the flesh tone, causing a gray, which in turn looks like a nice 5 o'clock shadow. Once this was done, I worked on the hair, which was highlighted in the exact same way as the boots and the gloves. I started with Abaddon Black because it's nice and glossier, and hair oftentimes has a little bit of a shimmer to it, and then applied 2 highlights of a dark gray and then a brighter gray. Finally, we move on to the metallic parts, and this is going to be very uneventful. The way I tackled this was via applying a dark steely blue to the hilt and the pommel of the sword, and then a normal silver, both colors from scale 75, to the blade of the sword. And I made sure to keep the middle recess, the blood groove, nice and black. Now, small details like these, especially on board game miniatures, I tend to not highlight very much. I applied a singular highlight to the blade with a brighter silver speed metal from scale 75, but didn't really do much more than that. The reflections caused by the reflective pigments in the paint on a small detail like this are really good enough for me. Finally, it's time to work on the base, and obviously we're gonna do snow. So I started by applying a color that was a mixture of teals and grays to kind of get a good frosty undercoat. And then I took baking powder, matte medium, and some PVA glue and water and mixed them together into a slurry and started to apply it to the base. Now, I understand there is concern about this kind of solution yellowing over time, but I believe there's a difference between using baking powder and baking soda. In this case, I'm using baking powder, and I think soda is the one that kind of turns more yellow. I've used this recipe in the past, as long as over a year ago, and it hasn't yellowed yet, so I'm crossing my fingers here that I got a winning solution for some easy snow. I made sure to also apply some snow to the bottom of his cloak and also to his shoulders along his fur and his hair. Applying the snow to the base was a little bit messy, so I ran my finger along the bottom to create a nice edge between the snow and the base rim, and then I painted the base rim black. Alright, that's gonna finish up the paint. Hold up! Apparently if I don't paint the pommel of the sword white with red eyes, fanboys will literally shit bricks. So I figured I'd save your guys' anuses and fix that up for you. Can you imagine literally pooping a brick? What would that do to you? Something that I kind of relearned during this process was that if you want something to read as black, you need to have a lot of black in it. If you break down all of the colors used in this nice little convenient pie chart, this big old slice right here is kind of the amount of black or very close to black color you should have. This would be grays, and then a small amount of bright colors like whites and other off-white colors. 2, paint finish really isn't that different. If I want a nice difference in finish, I should consider using something like gloss varnish to get that really punchy gloss finish. And number 3, matte black is not enough. And what I mean by that is that the matte black color isn't dark enough. When a color is glossy or satin, the color is more vibrant, and in this case, the blacks are darker. So for the blue cloth element and the scarf and also the cape, I found myself using Abaddon Black to do the shadows to get that nice true black color, to have that black come across real nicely. Oh, hi Bullet, you here for the outro? Well, I have my direwolf here for the end of this video. Guys, if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. Okay, you can go down. Sorry. Let me know what you think of the end result that I got on Jon Snow, whether you think the different parts of the black armor are distinct enough or if there isn't enough contrast. And don't forget, if you want to listen to A Song of Ice and Fire, the book series by George R.R. Martin, you can do so on Audible by signing up for a trial at audibletrial.com/Miniac. If you like the channel and you want to support it, there are many links in the description that enable you to do that, namely a Patreon campaign that has a bunch of fun rewards, like a Discord server where you and I can hang out any day of the week and talk about your miniature painting projects or the taste of the rainbow. Really, anything goes in that server. Also, there's an Amazon shopping link in the description that you can use while shopping on Amazon. Subscribe or die! And most importantly, don't forget to paint more minis!